My name's Della Enns, and I'm on the board of Moses, and I'm here to introduce you to my friend Steve Acheson. He's another Moses changemaker, and I first met Steve through Fair Share CSA Coalition when he was a farmer for his farm Peacefully Organics, where he taught veterans the healing power of the land. Steve grew up on a dairy farm, an active 4-H'er, joining the Army right out of high school after 9/11. He served in Iraq and sustained a back injury, pretty serious back injury. So Steve understands the overprescribing of opioids to treat pain. Steve is a founding member of Veterans for Compassionate Care, advocating for the legalization of cannabis. Steve speaks out on behalf of Iraq veterans against the war. I've seen him be a delegate for Farmers Union and working at the Capitol, speaking out for Wisconsin Farmers Union, advocating for health, against the opioids and for cannabis legalization. I asked Steve's wife, Stephanie, what she loves about Steve, and she said, he's a radical in every sense of the word. Radical means root in math, as in a square root. In botany, it means springing from the root. In slang, rad is good or excellent. In chemistry, it's highly reactive and forms new bonds quickly. In social studies, radical means advocating a complete political or social change, a revolutionary, a change maker. That's Steve. So, unfortunately, Steve with F.L. Morris co-founded our South Central Hemp Cooperative. And unfortunately, Steve is sick today, and his family is sick, and they can't be here. But my good friend, F.L. Morris, who's going to come up here, is going to accept his award. FL? FL is the owner of Grassroots Farm and the board president of the Hemp Cooperative, and also the vice president of South Central Farmers Union. And in Steve's own words, he says, FL is a leader he'd follow anywhere. So she's quite an appropriate person to accept this award. Thank you.
Okay, this is for Steve. I took a picture of you all for Steve. I'm not Steve, I'm FL Morris. FL, she, her pronouns. I took a pic, that was the first thing on my list. I want to use first my own words, but then I'm going to read a wonderful and powerful speech that Steve wrote in first person. I'm going to try to read it in third person, but it's not my words, so wrap your mind around that. Ultimately, what I think of this is this wonderful plaque and an opportunity to congratulate a change maker, but what this is a platform to be heard by many people. So I want to recognize first myself, the board, and the staff of Moses for giving folks a chance to take this platform and spread ideas that might otherwise not have been spread without this award. So those are my words, and that's all the words that I'm giving, because now I'm going to read Steve's speech. So if I mess up and say I and my instead of Steve and he, my apologies. First, Steve would like to sincerely thank Sarah Tedeschi, Audrey Alwell, and the entire Moses staff for all the work they have done behind the scenes to make this award a reality. There's a slideshow, and I have prompts, so, okay. Let me just do a demo. Okay, back, all right. He'd also like to congratulate the other award winners for their accomplishments. Steve's apologies for having to miss this conference, as it's always been his favorite place to be at the end of February. Apologizes. But with a 12-year-old running a 102-degree fever and not feeling the best, he thought it would be wise that he stay home and keep from getting everyone else at the conference sick right before planting season begins. Steve is extremely honored and humbled to be receiving this award in front of so many amazing, dedicated, radical farmers. Steve remembers attending his first Moses conference in 2014, just 6 years ago, about to enter into his first season as an owner of their CSA farm, in total awe of the quality of people at this conference. Steve spent 4 years prior to that completing an engineering degree with his GI Bill benefits. Simultaneously, for lack of a better term, Steve was raging pretty hard against the war machine after completing a 5-year enlistment as a forward observer in the Army and a deployment to Sadr City, Iraq in 2005. Steve had joined Iraq Veterans Against the War before leaving active duty service in 2008 and dedicated quite a bit of his time to anti-war activism, protesting, marching, demonstrations, speaking out, etc. While this was a period of tremendous personal growth and provided Steve with an outlet to direct his post-deployment angst, at the end of the day, it was a lot of energy spent throwing a proverbial firecracker at the wall, leaving himself without a lot to show for all of the effort. The wars were still happening, his friends were still dying needlessly from combat, suicide, and opioid overdose, and there was a complete lack of real community support for returning veterans like Steve. In 2013, when Steve graduated from UW-Platteville, the only thing he knew for sure was that there was no way that he was going to spend the rest of his life behind a computer screen as an engineer. It was a great fallback plan, but Steve had this feeling that he needed something more fulfilling. It was around that time that Steve met his partner, Steph, and she introduced him, to the CSA model of farming. Steve would visit her on the weekends and open her fridge and just be amazed that all of the produce came from a single farm right up the road. They moved to Madison after graduation and joined a local CSA, where they volunteered as worker members in the spring of 2013. And that's where Steve first realized that he had stumbled upon what seemed like the perfect job for him. Steve had been raised on a dairy farm as a kid, but having to leave the farm at age 12 left him always feeling like something was missing, and that feeling was even stronger after returning home from his deployment. Stepping onto those fields in 2013 felt just like home again. That's when Steve saw an ad from a farm near Middleton that also happened to be owned by a disabled veteran. He called them up. As it turned out, they needed not just a field hand, but a full-time manager of their 70-member CSA. After a very, very brief interview and tour of the farm, Steve was hired as the new manager. Armed with nothing more than his smartphone and a few basic hand tools, he did the only thing he could think of and called on 4 or 5 other local veterans he had met over the past few years in the anti-war community, and all pretty similar situations as his. They spent the next few months making a lot of mistakes, but with Steph's help, by the end of the season, they were producing the majority of the food going into those 70 CSA shares right from the farm. At the end of the 2013 season, Steph and Steve had the opportunity to rent the land themselves and essentially started over from scratch. They had no tractor, no equipment, no walk-in cooler, no truck, not even crates for their shares, but they had a dream and the desire to farm. One thing they realized from that first season was the serious healing that happened in those fields for the veterans who participated. The camaraderie that they built was tangible, and the sense of belonging to their community and the earth was undeniable. They could turn around at the end of the day and literally see the fruits of their labor while they were beginning to replace the destructive memories of their time participating in the wars of terror with productivity. They knew that when formerly peacefully organic produce, that keeping veterans at the forefront of their farm was to be a #1 priority. They started an annual concert fundraiser called Veggies for Vets that took place right in their equipment shed. At the end of this program, they were providing over 20 CSA shares for free to at-risk veterans in the Madison community. They also helped start a farmers market at the VA, UW, and St. Mary's hospitals in Madison. They had acquired a USDA grant to employ and train veterans and had been able to incorporate 15 veterans onto the farm as worker shares, many of which he still communicates with regularly today. Through some wonderful nonprofits and grant programs, Steve was able to source equipment, vehicles, infrastructure, and yes, was even able to afford to purchase totes for their CSA shares. Things were overall going great for their farm. Then in the beginning of 2016, during the first week of scheduled CSA delivery, an old service-connected injury to Steve's spine was re-aggravated while planting potatoes. The next thing he knew, he was in excruciating pain, and both of his legs were numb. They headed to the VA for a third emergency back surgery. Once again, Steph stepped in to save the farm and organized a crew of volunteers to help while Steve slowly recovered from the operation. Unfortunately, Steve developed a permanent nerve condition called cauda equina, and at the end of the 2016 season, they had to make an extremely difficult decision to shut down their farm operation. Steve remembers distinctly being asked by one of their farm supporters, "So Steve, now that you're not farming 80+ hours a week anymore, what are you going to do with yourself?" To answer that question, Steve has to go back to 2018 when he was first discharged from the Army. The VA had Steve taking about 7 pills every day. He was a complete zombie, still dealing with post-traumatic stress, trying to get through the first semester of an engineering degree. He was about to call it quits when a classmate of his introduced him to something that would forever change Steve's life: medical cannabis, exclamation point. Over the next few months, Steve was able to replace every medication at the VA that the VA had him taking with one all-natural alternative. He went from almost dropping out of school in February of 2009 to becoming an upper-level math tutor, founding the first student veteran organization on campus, and working as a student ambassador and in student government, as well as in 2011, he was named co-student of the year at his university. Steph was coincidentally the other co-student of the year at this time, which is the first time we really noticed each other. Cannabis allowed Steve to be a better student, a better person, a better farmer, and to live his life on his own terms without addiction and the fog of prescription pills. It was an off-ramp for Steve, not a gateway. So when he was asked at the end of the 2016 season, "Steve, what are you going to do with yourself?" his answer was immediately, "I think I'm going to try to get medical cannabis legalized in our state." Within the next few months, Steve would help form Wisconsin Veterans for Compassionate Care, a nonpartisan coalition of veterans from around the state who have all found medical cannabis to be an effective alternative to pills to treat their service-connected injuries. They've met with legislators from both sides of the aisle, law enforcement, medical professionals, and even hosted a roundtable discussion at the Capitol, where Vice News filmed an episode for their national coverage of the medical cannabis movement. In just 2 short years, Steve went from organic farmer to, according to the magazine High Times, Wisconsin's #1 medical cannabis advocate. Not an accolade I could have imagined receiving when I was first getting out of the Army in 2008, by the way. I'm sorry I said I, but that was a quote. Our organization was receiving so much attention that when Governor Evers announced he would be including funding in his budget to legalize medical cannabis, Steve was invited to the Capitol to give a speech about his experience. All of this said, medical cannabis is still illegal in the state of Wisconsin, but he's happy to announce that we now have not only 1, but 2 bills being circulated around the legislature in support of legalizing medical cannabis. With a very partisan legislature, we have a long way to go towards our goal, but I believe Wisconsin Veterans for Compassionate Care has done a lot to move the needle forward, being able to bring safe access to this life-saving medication to our state. Being so involved in the medical cannabis movement set Steve up very well for when, in 2018, the production of hemp was once again legalized. FL, that's me, also indicated my desire, okay, now this is getting strange, her desire to grow hemp. After attending umpteen hemp gatherings, meetings, conferences, seminars, and luncheons, it became apparent to us that there were some seriously nefarious individuals and companies attempting to take advantage of farmers desperately looking to find profitability again. The two of us embarked on a journey aimed at organizing and protecting hemp farmers that would inevitably lead to starting the South Central Wisconsin Hemp Cooperative, or South Central Hemp, in February of 2019, along with Steph and some other members of our Farmers Union chapter. Now with 9 producer-member farms, South Central Hemp is on the verge of launching the only cooperatively owned, Wisconsin-grown, Wisconsin-processed, 100% certified organic CBD tincture product lines on the market. I'm sorry I'm looking down so much, but I am reading. We had no idea that we were getting, this is true, we had no idea that we were getting ourselves into when we started this whole thing, but it's been one hell of a ride, and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. That's true for me as well. So enough about Steve. Wait, we're good, okay. The biggest thing that Steve's realized in his time in agriculture is that you are nothing without the support and encouragement from the people and organizations around you. I'd like to take the remainder of Steve's time to acknowledge my own personal change makers and the people who have helped me get to where Steve is today. That's me. I'm not going to read the paragraph, though, because that would be awkward. So, no, I'm not. It was already read by Della. We worked that out. Okay. Next up is someone that many of you have probably heard of, Chris Marion, owner of Circle M Community Farm and Bed and Breakfast. Chris and Steve first met in 2014 at a roundtable seed discussion organized through Fair Share CSA Coalition. Steve remembers nothing else from that meeting other than Chris's wonderfully warm and generous personality, a bit of her quirkiness, which he has grown quite fond of over the years. Chris has had such an impact on how we view community that they actually purchased their 6-acre property just a mile from her farm in Blanchardville. She is my county board supervisor, and Steve will tell you that no one works harder for their constituents. Through our South Central Wisconsin Farmers Union chapter, Steve has learned countless lessons from Chris on how to be a more effective advocate, and her tenacity for making positive change in this world is second to none. Chris Marion. Is she here? No. We'll tell her. If you haven't heard of the Farmer Veteran Coalition, I'd encourage you to check them out. Steve would, so would I. The FVC is who provided Steve with the scholarship that covered his registration costs for that first conference in 2014, which is also where Steve and me, FL, met. Over the years, they've also provided Steve's farm with small equipment grants, educational resources, and a national support network of other veteran farmers. For a number of years now, veterans in Wisconsin have been trying to get their own Farmer Veteran Coalition chapter going, but there just hasn't been a critical mass of folks necessary, as it requires starting a 501c3. They're hoping that this is the year that they'll be able to get it done. So if you're a veteran or just someone with nonprofit experience who would like to help veterans in our state, please consider attending their breakout meeting in room D on Friday, tomorrow, from 5:15 to 6:15. The Wisconsin Farmers Union, so I'm going to read this in first person because I read this and I agree, so this makes it easier for me. The Wisconsin Farmers Union is hands down the most democratic organization I've ever been a part of. particularly my chapter in South Central Wisconsin. They have given me a home to continue to be a radical and have supported my efforts to legalize medical cannabis and push forward the hemp movement every step of the way. Their advocacy on behalf of farmers is truly invaluable, and if you aren't already a member of your local farmers union chapter, I suggest you look into joining. That comes from me and Steve. For only $30 a year, we couldn't think of a better investment. Finally, is the real unsung hero of this story, Steve's partner in business and life, Stephanie Krieger. We mentioned her a couple times already, but she really is the star of the show. Clearly more intelligent than me by a mile, than Steve. We're all equals. Steph works as a full-time high school student science teacher. She keeps Steve grounded and out of trouble. She's the mother of their son, Aldo, and his stepson, Alex. And Steve loves her with all of his heart. I love her too. Without Steph's guidance and support through some seriously dark times for Steve, he would probably be one of the nearly 20 veterans a day across this country who takes their own life. I'm going to read that sentence again. Without Steph's guidance and support through some seriously dark times for Steve, he'd probably be one of the nearly 20 veterans a day across this country who takes their own life. That's the end. If there's anyone sitting in this room attending your first conference with big dreams, don't ever let anything get in your way. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do something. Find ways around, over, and through barriers, and don't ever give up. For any veterans sitting in this room wondering where you belong, just remember you are not alone. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.